Anheuser-Busch, the maker of Bud Light, has offered financial support to workers targeted over the Dylan Mulvaney controversy, according to the Wall Street Journal. CEO Michael Ducaris said in a conference call that Bud Light delivery drivers, sales representatives, and product distributors have been confronted over the brand's partnership with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney.
Ducaris has seemingly tried to distance his company from the controversy by downplaying the Mulvaney promotion. He said this was one can, one influencer, one post, and not a campaign. On yesterday's call, he added that the company's drop in Bud Light sales following the partnership represented only 1% of the company's global sales volume. Well, I don't quite believe that happy talk. They're down 26% in the United States. But what do you think about this?
It's interesting. America is in this culture war phenomenon that I wouldn't have predicted would have lasted as long as it has. In many people's estimation, Bud Light was of the lower rung of beers in general to begin with in terms of domestic beers. But I think that this has been blown out of proportion. We're seeing the fights. We're seeing folks creating videos and stumping out their Bud Light products. And it's just getting pretty ridiculous. But looking at the numbers, looking at the return on investment for Anheuser-Busch, this is a very small percentage of what they've actually lost. It's not taking the huge toll that I think some of the right-leaning or anti-trans people would have assumed that it would have taken. This is probably the most shockingly uneventful boycott of an industry that I've seen, just in terms of how little of an effect it has actually had on the company.
I don't know. I think the fact that the company has to keep coming out and distancing itself from it is itself a clear indication that they are nervous about this. Their stock price has taken a large hit. Look, I don't think this is blown out of proportion at all. Kid Rock aside, shooting cans up on the internet or whatever, I actually think this shows something important, which is there is this pent-up frustration. And I don't think it's just on the right. I think there are a lot of people in the middle, independents, who feel this way too. They're really tired of having woke politics jammed down their throats in every corporate decision, right? Every buying decision that they make, every game that they watch, right? And I think they're expressing that frustration because, and the reason I think this is working, as opposed to, there's been a bunch of, the right has been saying for years, go woke, go broke. That has not been the case until now. And not they're totally broke, but they're headed.
Anheuser-Busch is not right. Broke.
But it has hurt them in a way that these previous boycotts, attempts to boycott have not. And that's because there's actually a market mechanism here. As you said, there's nothing special about Bud Light. There are lots of cheap light beers, right, on the market. It's very easy for somebody to switch to a beer that has not insulted them culturally in this way. It's an easy switch to make. And the reason that this doesn't solve the issue, I think, of woke corporations is because in so many cases, there isn't anywhere to switch to, right? So if we think about big banks, for example, all of them have these kinds of woke promotions, messaging, language. All of these corporations at a larger level, they can sort of count on the fact that all of the major players in a lot of these industries feel the same way culturally, or at least they want people to think they feel the same way culturally. And therefore, there's not really any room for this market mechanism of dissatisfied customers saying, you culturally insulted me, I'm not going to pay you to insult me.
So the term in and of itself is problematic because I feel like there are several people on the right, on the alt-right, and right of center who have basically demonized woke as a word and turned it into something that it is not. When we're talking equity, when we're talking inclusion, when we're talking having societies that reflect the people who are actually in them, there is nothing wrong with that. To see a deliberate effort from various private sector organizations, various entertainment organizations or entertainment influencing organizations speak towards generations of people who are of color, generations of people who may be LGBT, generations of people who have historically not been reflected or not been reflected well or seen at all in some of these industries, even though they are also people who buy into said products, I think has been wrong. And we have to be very diligent in our understanding of why this is important. Isolating certain segments of the American population just because you may not agree with them is wrong. And these industries, these corporations are utilizing their name and their brand to showcase, one, the vast diversity of our culture, the vast diversity that lies within America that makes us the great country that we are. And we're seeing this insane amount of pushback from individuals who want to take America back to white, to only where the voices of those who are heterosexual are heard, to where there is not to where people who want to see themselves reflected, who historically have not been, are also still not reflected. And I think that is a wrong way to lean.
So So first of all, I don't think that it's an element of diversity of the country to have the imagined view that male and female are not distinct. I don't think that that lie is not part of the diversity of our country. Even if there are people who feel that way, that's still an opinion, but it's not a
transgender
essential.
People exist. That's not an opinion.
People who believe. I'm not questioning that they believe something, but you cannot change from male to female. There are deep biological differences between a man and a woman, a girl and a boy. And by the way, it doesn't stop at genitals or outside appearances. There are psychological differences. There are neurological differences. There are obviously a long list of important physical characteristics that are different between men and women, which is why it's a huge problem, for example, to put biological men in a prison with biological women. But leaving the transgender debate specifically aside, I want to go back to the idea that woke is ill-defined, or that first of all, I think people know it when they see it. It has been redefined.
It has been redefined in a way that it was not its original intent, in a way that it's so far from its original intent, because the term woke has been around for 4+ generations.
So let's see if we can at least agree on a definition of what we're talking about, and then we can talk about how we're. So I would give this definition, right, as the view that disparities between ever proliferating identity groups points that inherently, if there's a disparity between one group or another, that it points to some kind of inherently systemic oppression or oppressed dynamic, right? That disparity then must be eliminated by any means. Would you agree that that's at least something close to what you can?
It is close. I mean, we have seen that through, and it doesn't just exist within the lens of race. It also exists within the lens of women's rights, women's voting rights, women having the ability to sit on boards, women being able to advance in our culture as well in various ways. I think that the part of it that has been hijacked is the part that looks towards trying to diminish civil rights and equity, but in addition to that, keep certain groups in their place, so to speak, because of the advancements that we're seeing in many cases, or the pledges that were made after the George Floyd protest, and the pledges that were specifically made by certain private sector corporations. Then we saw in America that wanted to push things back. They wanted to turn the tide. They wanted to go back to an era in which there was a certain level of oppression. And we've seen that in various state and local government institutions, as well as from the private sector. We've seen that level of pushback where even though certain pledges were made, that doesn't mean that those things actually happen. We didn't see a sizable increase in terms of people of color on boards, or even in some of the institutions that they were arguing to be visible in. We didn't see the types of criminal justice reform relief that was argued for. We didn't see the types of educational reforms that we would have liked to or hoped to have seen and have fought for the past 6-7 generations. I think that those things are things that we need to be talking about in the public square, and the types of advancements that this nation needs to see to be on the equitable front that America argues that it purports in terms of a democracy, because quite frankly, there are a lot of people who were born and raised under the red, white, and blue and know nothing other than that don't feel as though the democracy works for them.
Okay, so I want to go back to a couple of things you said. So I actually think women on boards is a great example, and a great example of why these disparities. I don't think that it's a productive way to talk about any of our cultural differences or about the country in general as systemically oppressive, because there are overall between groups and within groups, there are disparities. So for example, women on boards, right? It could be that America is still a very sexist country in 2023, even though we have this obnoxious, constant celebration of girl power and everything that men can do, women can do. I certainly got that message. I'm 35, right? And I got that message from when I was in kindergarten. So that seems like, a sort of out there explanation for me. Or it could be that the disparities between men and women on boards are as a result of our natural sex differences. They're a result of the fact that women don't pursue the same set of careers. So for example, the top 5 best paying majors, it's all things like, I can't remember what the name of the major is, but it's basically calculating volume underneath for underground oil resources, right? So to being able to engineer various ways to extract oil from under the ground. That's one of the top paying majors. 4 out of the 5 top paying majors in colleges are dominated by men, 80% to 20%, okay? If you take the lowest paying majors, right? Things like sociology, they are dominated by women. I'm not saying that sociology is inherently worse than calculating the volume of oil, right? But I think there are natural inclinations where women are they're choosing majors that they find more interesting. And I don't think that that's oppression.
Men are also more likely to be quoted even within the same job fields, or are more than likely to be given salary and wages that are higher than women who are also in those same work fields. And we know that. Part of that is negotiating power that men utilize in those fields because they feel empowered to negotiate the salary offer where women do not.
Because they also work longer.
Exist.
They also, on average, even among full-time workers, men work longer hours than women do. Even among those classified as full-time, they're more likely to value salary.
Those men do not have the same mommy tax that the mommies, the women who they impregnate, technically have.
Women are more likely for that reason, more likely to value flexibility over a raise. So
because they're typically tasked with more of those duties with child rearing, even though the man helped create said child.
They're choosing it. This is a free country.
Both the man and the woman chose the child. They made the child.
So this is exactly where I disagree with this disparities. I think it underlies this entire woke view, right? That because more women choose to stay home and raise their children, I think that's
those numbers have turned on their head quite considerably over the past decade, where we're seeing more and more women in the workforce than this nation has historically ever seen. And those women are trying to balance childcare duties. They're trying to balance children who get sick, because children get sick often. They're trying to balance all of those things with their work. And even in situations where there are two-parent households, the woman, and we've seen this, the woman is taking on the majority of the child-rearing duties.
Because I think this is where this conversation.
And these are two-parent households where both people are working.
Right. I think this conversation always breaks down because I think the reason for that is a natural
gender norms.
Yeah, not gender norms. I think it's biological differences between men and women on average will make different choices than men in a totally free society. And that's why we see, by the way,
we have structural and rigid gender norms that make it very difficult.
Some of those sex disparities actually grow the wealthier and quote unquote more equitable society is. So in for example, Sweden, where there's generous leave policies and so on from the government, okay, we actually see similar and actually wider disparities in a lot of cases, because actually when they're given the choice via like financial support to do so, even more women choose to balance work and career in a different way than feminists think that they should. Because this is actually the difference. I don't think that those disparities are resulting from an overall oppressive society that is forcing women to spend more time with their families than men are. I think there are simply more men who are willing to work the 80-hour-a-week job, okay, in a law firm to get that extremely high dollar salary. And that doesn't mean there are no women who want to do that. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be able to.
There are several female lawyers who are working those 80 hours a week, who also have husbands who are working, who are still raising 3 and 4 kids at home. And they are still taking on the majority of that parental responsibility.
That is between them and their husbands.
Those women are very honest about that.
That's between them and their husbands. But I just don't see these disparities inherently result from oppression at all. Well, this has been a sort of down to the brass tacks discussion, because I think that's really the debate we're having, right? Is whether these disparities mean, in all kinds of different contexts, whether these disparities mean that there is discrimination or oppression that is causing them in some way, or whether there might be any number of other explanations. In the case of women, I think it's sex differences, right? For any given disparity, there might be a bunch of other ones. But this was a good discussion, and I think we have more rising after this for you.